beer.
All right.
It's time for another one.
Another one, huh? All right. Eeny, meeny, miny, yo! Yo!
No! I can't not that! Anything but that!
Oh, Kathy, the shark faded.
Well, he got off easy. I'll have to find another one real quick. Yo! Yo! Get him out here! Come on! Bring him up here! Like this, huh? Like this. Get back or there'll be no dessert! Oh.
16, 2009, early in the morning, on a New York radio station, D. Lee, chief financial planner of Harvard Financial Educators, came on the radio station and openly, bluntly read a letter written by a white Caucasian male as to the conditions of black people as we stand today here in America. They are still our slaves. We can continue to reap profits from the blacks without the effort of physical slavery. Look at the current methods of containment that they use on themselves. Ignorance, greed, and selfishness. Their ignorance is a primary weapon of containment. A great man once said, the best way to hide something from black people is to put it in a book. We now live in the information age. They have gained the opportunity to read any book on any subject through the efforts of their fight for freedom. Yet they refuse to read. There are numerous books readily available at Borders, Barnes & Nobles, and Amazon.com, not to mention their own black bookstores that provide solid blueprints to reach economic equality, which should have been their fight all along. But few read consistently, if at all. Greed is another powerful weapon of containment. Blacks, since the abolition of slavery, have had large amounts of money at their disposal. Last year, they spent $10 billion during Christmas out of their own $450 billion in total yearly income, which is 2.22%. Any of us can use them as our target market for any business venture we care to dream up. No matter how outlandish, they will buy into it. Being primarily a consumer people, they function totally by greed. They continually want more, with little thought for saving or investing. Some would rather buy some sneakers than invest in starting a business. Some even neglect their own children to have the latest Tommy or Fubu. And they still think that having a Mercedes and a big house gives them status, or that they have achieved their dreams. They are fools. The vast majority of their people are still in poverty because their greed holds them back from collectively making better communities. With the help of BET and the rest of their black media that often broadcast destructive images into their own homes, we will continue to see huge profits like those of Tommy and Nike. Tommy Hilfiger has even jeered them, saying he doesn't want their money. And look how the fools spend more with him than ever before. They'll continue to show off to each other while we build solid communities with the profits from our businesses that we market to them. Selfishness, ingrained in their mind through slavery, is one of the major ways we continue to contain them. One of their own, Du Bois, said that there was an innate division in their culture. A talented tenth, he called it. He was correct in his deduction that there are segments in their culture that has achieved some form of success. However, that segment missed the fullness of his work. They didn't read that the talented 10th was then responsible to aid the non-talented 90% in achieving a better life. Instead, that segment has created another class, a buppy class, that looks down on their people or aids them in a condescending manner. They will never achieve what we have. Their selfishness does not allow them to be able to work together on any project or endeavor of substance. When they do get together, their selfishness lets their egos get in the way of their goals. Their so-called help organizations seem to only want to promote their name without making any real change in their community. They are content to sit in conferences and conventions in our hotels and talk about what they will do while they award plaques to the best speaker, not to the best doer. Is there no end to their selfishness? They steadfastly refuse to see that together each achieves more. Team. They do not understand that they are no better than each other because of what they own. As a matter of fact, most of those buppies are but 1 or 2 paychecks away from poverty, all of which is under the control of our pens in our offices and our rooms. Yes, we will continue to contain them as long as they refuse to read, continue to buy anything they want, and keep thinking they are helping their communities by paying dues to organizations which do little other than hold lavish conventions in our hotels. By the way, don't worry about any of them reading this letter. Remember, they don't read.
My name's Beryl Winfrey. I live in Roane County in East Tennessee. I'm here because I recognize the white supremacy system of racism. I'm white. Now, when I say that, my people a long time ago came up with these little check marks that we have to check, which we are white. And in reality, it's white or non-white. You know, they break that down into a lot of, we break that down into a lot of different groups. What we have done for hundreds of years, it can never be undone with words. Racism is prejudice plus power. I had a conversation yesterday with a black man and he said that he knew some of his people who were racist, and I talked with him about that, because without the power to take that prejudice and actively place it into position to cause people to do or not do, then it is simply just prejudice. You have to have that power in order for there to be racism. And most white people would look at me and say, I don't have any power. But we do have power. We have power just getting up in the morning and looking in the mirror and not having to think about race. That places us into a position to where our minds are clear and that it's a problem that we don't have to deal with. We don't think about it because we don't have to think about it. It's not something that completely controls our lives. So there, from the very beginning, when we wake up in the morning, then we have an advantage, and that advantage comes from the color of the skin. uh, when we go into a store and we're not assumed that we're going to be a shoplifter simply because of the color of our skin. That is an advantage. When I walk down the street and I'm more safe, now that's not saying nothing would happen ever to me, but I would be more safe walking down the street alone than you would be. That is racism, because of that unequal playing field that's there, that gives me advantage simply because of the color of my skin. When we take advantage of those things, then we are being white supremacists. Because most people, when they think about someone that's white supremacist, they're thinking about the guy in the fatigues and he's in the woods and he's shooting and, target. But I am being white supremacist when I accept an establishment that gives me more than it gives you. Every day of your life as a white person, all day, every day, everything that you do, everywhere you go, you are taking advantage of being white. Most of my people, they don't think about that. They've never had to think about that, which is the greatest advantage of being white. They don't have to think about it. It's not a determining factor in their life. That is a conscious factor. I don't actively celebrate the 4th of July because you don't have freedom. You're not free. You have oppression every day of your life. If you have children, when those children are born, you have to immediately begin to teach them what they cannot do in order to survive. The young black man he's a much different product of our oppression than what the young black man was 100 years ago. I don't want my children in a civil war in this country between black and white. So in that way, I'm selfish. I was born into a family where my father was an overt racist. My mother was a covert racist. But both of them had very strong, I always felt like my mother was more dangerous. My mother was more dangerous.
My mother was more dangerous.
Most of us isolate ourselves. We can get up in the morning, go to work, go shopping, go do everything in our life that has to be done without coming in contact with you. And don't tell me my best friend is, because I hear that all the time. My best friend is black. I don't want to hear that. Racism is the cause of the problems that we have in this country. It's the cause of the crime. It's, racism is, I feel like, the backbone of all ills that this country has. If the day ever came when I could walk into a place of work and you could be there wearing whatever clothing you wanted to wear, whether it was clothing that depicted your African descent or wearing your hair. White people tend to say, well, that's another question, I guess. We would gain knowing you, see, because we don't know you. And that robs us of a great blessing. We think we are entire and complete and that we don't need to know you or anyone of color. We know what we've done to you. And we know what over 500 years we've put in your head. And we know how to utilize that. And we know how to take advantage of that. And we even know how to have a black friend. We know the dynamics of who is in control. And I don't care how much the system has changed to the point to where what is politically correct at this point might be different from what was politically correct in the 50s. We still know where your place is. We know where our place is. And to me, the greatest deception that we've caused is that your people believe us when we say, this is my place and that is your place. Because I see evidence, and especially in seminars like this, because I will hear non-whites speak, and I hear them speak when they don't even know that they're speaking from a position that I have told them is the only way they're going to be allowed to succeed to that degree that I'm going to let them come up that ladder. Of course, I'm just going to let them come up so far. But the greatest sadness for me is that they don't even know. See, I have done such a good job that they don't even know that I've done this to them. A strong black man one time said to me, one of the greatest things you can do for my people is to stop shedding any tears. And he said to me, you must stop the tears, because my people are so conditioned to putting their arms around you and comforting you when you weep, then they are no longer strong. Their strength that is coming from standing up and saying, no, you're not going to treat me like that. That strength is gone because they've got their arms around you, comforting you. When I sat in that room the other night, when the author of Without Sanctuary, when he was speaking and those pictures were there of the lynchings, the methods that we have used to keep control, I wept. But when I wept, his words came back to me, because all around me, the non-white people would reach out and comfort me. My God, there in front of, I don't understand it. Another very wise black man said to me, don't ever ask my people for forgiveness, because the word forgiveness means the eradication of a debt. If someone owes you money and you forgive that debt, then they don't owe you anymore. And I don't want to ever be a part of, for even a moment between just the two of us, eradicating any part of the debt that I owe you, because it's a just debt. And it's a debt that needs to be repaid to the fullness. Christianity has been misused for hundreds of years to keep your people in subjugation. And I'm speaking now a reality that the history books do not record, but history does. Christianity was used because if I said okay, you don't believe the way I believe, and Christianity's the best way to believe. So I'm going to take you, and it's going to be for your own good, honey. It's going to be for your own good. I'm going to take you, and I'm going to tear away everything about you, and just keep your hands and your feet, because they can help me. But I'm going to do this for your own good, because I'm going to give you a God. Now, what does that God look like? The reality of it is, when he came here, he didn't look like me. So what am I going to do about that? I'm going to make him look like me. So for hundreds of years, we've been telling you, and now you have to keep in mind that we took away any other God that you might have through force, through fear, through pain, through any means necessary. So now I'm going to give you a God, but I'm going to do that in a way that is going to further me. So I'm going to give you a God that looks like me, so that when you bow down to that God, you're bowing down to me. Because the reality is, the Bible tells us what Jesus looked like when he walked here. The Bible tells us what he's going to look like when he comes back. We have taken that and changed it. Do you remember when Jesus went to Egypt? He hid in Egypt. The people in Egypt, honey, they're not white people. How could he hide that? See, so that we've done that. We've given your people a God that looks like me, so that you don't have any qualm about bowing down to me. See, because this is the image of God. I don't know of any sin that we've committed that's greater than that one. And we did it with the Bible in our hands when we were beating your ancestors for looking at us eye to eye. And we're quoting to them from this scripture. Even if we allowed them to have their own ministers, which there wasn't any of because we didn't allow them to read. But if we said, okay, you can have your church. This is my plantation. I'm going to do what I want with it. You can have your church. But then spies were sent. And those spies would stand outside the church, and that man would be beaten, perhaps killed, if he preached anything other than 3 sermons. And those 3 sermons were turn the other cheek, obey your master, and it's going to get better one of these days. God's going to take care of all of it. You're going to be in a happy, happy land. So put up with what you're putting up with now. And we made your people preach that to your people. And it's still being done. It's still being done. Those are the sermons that your people hear. Those sermons are what causes your people to comfort me when I do something that's wrong.
There's ones for all the leaders. Leader, let's all
him, snakes could not violate him. Pimps memorize his lines verbatim. He reps in YO, gives C-notes to Y-nos. Not church, this how we tithe though. He walks a tenement, sleeps at his super fly condo. My kind of nigga, my icon, my idol. No certificate for this misfit who handle business. The odds stacked against him, he fights back, Mac and Benzes. Never puts cash or ass before friendship. He laughs last, and some die young, he is still existing. Somehow he got around the pitfalls of the system. When he walks, we watch. When he talks, we listen. Leaders.
Who do I copy? Look into the mirror and it's you I say look at me. Everything new like it fresh from the factory. Everything you do it impact me. Your lifestyle attract me. Parents try distract me. When I grow up I want to be like you exactly. And as soon as I get over this acne, there's no way anybody could have stopped me. My gravitate toward the aura and all the mannerism. The sending out of orders and man start moving busy. The locking of the corners, the streets and all the buildings. Me love you like a father. Me ready and me willing. Anything where you attack is lying my dominion and me have similar thoughts. I share the same opinions. Me have it say you're smart. With my best interest at heart, I'm following your path. Your mind where you are walk.
The paramount, the Caesar, the monsters, the grandiose, the martyrs, the hell on earth pompers, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnsons, the Harlemites, the Garveyites, black as the credit card we swipe, popping down a night for all of mine. I can see myself back at the Audubon, Malcolm on the podium, shells drop to linoleum, swipe those, place them on display at the Smithsonian, next to only gems that were left behind by holy men, infectious, charisma of those who gave us direction, the anti-sexes, resistance against oppression, progressive thinking, ghetto speakers, protesters against the colored-only section to the Jenna Sixen, the Frost Nixon, the contradiction, the cross, the crucifixion, the loss we took for sinning, on Easter's back inscription, that it was written, that nothing is coincidence, and they took our leaders and they lynched them.
This one's for all the leaders. Let's all change the mind.
His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow. And his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. And his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. And his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace.
Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is your brother, Nathaniel, okay, of Israel United in Christ. I pray that all of you have been taking your notes, okay, study, Israel, study. I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to put this truth out, and if it be the Most High's will, we're going to take it up a notch. We're going to bring this truth out on a greater and greater level, and we're going to need your help. All right, so today's topic, we're going to deal with Hollywood, how Hollywood puts the truth in their movies, but very few of us pick up on it.
Hey, you know that devil is back. Blood Alliance! Blood Alliance. Now, you know the Lord set me out to win over the devil and his evil. Now, Blood Alliance, you get that black nigger out here. By the Lord God of Israel, nigger! Come on! The lost tribes of Israel were black.
Okay, next we want to get into the northern kingdom of Israel, which is Ephraim and the other tribes of Israel. How they got to this side of the world. Does Hollywood know? Does history bear witness that the native Indians on this side of the world are Israelites? Let's examine a movie called 1492.
There is a third way. By sailing west across the ocean sea.
The distance is unknown. It's said to be infinite.
Superstition. I believe the Indies are no more than 750 leagues west of the Canary Islands.
How can you be so certain?
The calculations of Toscanelli, Marin de Tir, Esdras.
Esdras is a Jew.
So what's worse?
2 minutes, and already you're a dead man.
For telling the truth?
Yes.
They put the writings of Esdras in the speech of Columbus. That's how Spain knew the Israelites were on this side of the world. By the writings of who? Esdras, the prophet Esdras, that you can find his writings in a regular Bible, but also in a book called the Apocrypha that was taken out by the Protestant Christians. Let's look at 2nd Esdras chapter 13, verse 40. I'm going to read that. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoner out of their own lands in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanasseh the king of Assyria led away captive. And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. So the land they came into was the land of the Assyrian captivity. Now watch this. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. That's the key. Where never mankind dwelt. What's that talking about? How are they able to take counsel together? When you read Ezra in the regular Bible, chapter 1, it tells you that the new Persian king, Cyrus, gave the Israelites liberty to return to their own land, gave them liberty from captivity. 10 of the tribes took counsel together and went to a land where never mankind dwelt. Let's read on. Verse 42, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river. Now it gives you the route they took. Verse 44, for the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of 1.5 years. So it tells you the amount of time it took them to get to a land where never mankind dwelt. 1.5 years. And the same region is called Osiris. Okay, the region of this land over here is called Osiris. Okay? So the prophets understood. Hollywood knows that the people that Columbus was looking for, history bears witness, were the Israelites, the 10 tribes of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. So you got some Israelites out amongst us today, our brothers, our sisters, who reject this understanding of Ezra, who reject the Apocrypha, who reject the writing of Ezra. We could care less about what you accept and what you reject. Okay? The truth is the truth. The Bible says, Christ said, you can do nothing against the truth. Okay? You got some of our people saying, oh, they're giving away their legacy to the Mexicans, the North American Indians. Listen. We're going to go by what thus saith the Lord. We're going to go by biblical and archaeological facts to back it up. We could care less about your great speeches. The truth is the truth. Next, we're going to show you a movie called Cat Ballou, starring Jane Fonda. Okay? Now, in it, you're going to see a Native American Indian. I believe he said he was of the Sioux Nation. I can't remember what tribe he says. Anyway, regardless of that, the point is that in this segment, he does not remember that he's an Israelite. Now, you might say, oh, he doesn't remember seeing it. That means no. How many so-called black men and women don't remember that they're the Israelites? Many of us have forgotten. Why? Because the prophecy tells us in Jeremiah 17 verse 4. Let me look at it real quick. Jeremiah 17 verse 4. And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee. And I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever. So the Israelites, this is proof that not only Judah would discontinue from their heritage, but Ephraim and the northern kingdom of Israel would discontinue from their heritage. All of it happened when we were warring against Edom, when they conquered us and enslaved us. Okay, so let's just take a look.
Well, this here's my new bronc buster. This is my daughter, Catherine. Shalom Aleichem, Jackson 2 Bears.
Mr. Ballou, what's the use of saying Shalom Aleichem to me? I'm a full Sioux Indian. I'm not one of the chosen people.
All right, go ahead being stubborn if you want it.
No, I ain't stubborn.
Oh, not much you ain't. You know, according to an ex-congressman of these United States I heard give a lecture at the Chautauqua this winter, Indians is the lost tribe of Israel, but he won't admit it.
Just ain't true.
He was an ex-congressman of these United States, I tell you.
Oh, Papa, maybe he was mistaken.
Oh, no, he was not. Jackson just got a mean, stubborn streak in him is all. I brought Mr. Bernstein, the telegraph operator, out here from town last month, and he stood right where you're standing now, and he talked Hebrew at Jackson for 10 minutes by my watch, and Jackson pretended he didn't understand a word. Now, I call that stubborn.
Well, I didn't understand a word.
You see what I mean? Now, you get that trunk down out of there. I'll get the satchel.
Okay, so Israel, we must gather ourselves together. I'm talking about you elect Israelites. The wicked Israelites, no. You 2/3, no, I'm not talking about you. The Bible's not talking about you. You will not gather yourselves together. You that keep the commandments in Christ, we must gather ourselves together in understanding of what this Bible is saying. Okay? Time is short. Hollywood knows what Hollywood knows. Hollywood knows that you are the 12 tribes of Israel. The scholars of society know that you are the 12 tribes of Israel. You don't know that, though. Let's wake up. Let's get ourselves together. Let's get our minds right and come together in Christ. Okay? Have that love, respect for one another. Because, believe it or not, we're going to need one another soon to come. Shalom.
Is made up of 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet. 606. It's made up of stades, exactly the same. Now, if that's not interesting enough, look at the angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you take the angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the slope is 51.8 degrees. Let's go back to the earthworks. If you measure the line that goes straight through the center of the structure, right here, and then you go true north, it's 51.8 degrees. That angle is exactly the same angle as the pyramids of Giza. It is the same math, the same calculations as ancient Egyptians. Let me show you one more connection. In 1860, David Wyrick, he's a guy who surveyed the Newark earthworks. He was digging into a mound near those earthworks, and he found a wooden coffin made of oak. They opened up the coffin and found a skeleton of a man holding a little box that was about 8.10 inches in size. The box had been cemented shut here. This, by the way, is sitting in Ohio. Well, he opened up the box and he found a little man inside, a little black stone. They took it to scholars and they looked at it. The man seems to be carrying something, and there's writing here at first they couldn't recognize. The writing is, they thought in 1860, some sort of Hebrew. Well, finally, about 20 years later, they found some rabbis living in the area, and the rabbis looked at that, and they could read it. They said it was an old kind of block Hebrew, and it was a rendition of the 10 Commandments. Now, this is another piece. Block Hebrew, they said they'd never seen anything like it. Mainstream archaeologists at the time called this a hoax. But then in 1900, or just about after 1900, in Israel, they found the same block-style Hebrew writing. Mainstream archaeologists still dismiss the findings. They found it in Israel, and they found it in Ohio. But there was another stone that they found that they couldn't argue. This is the Bat Creek stone. It was found during the course of an official Smithsonian evacuation. The Smithsonian didn't understand the meaning of the writing on the stone. They thought it was Cherokee, since it came from Cherokee country. They didn't realize that it's actually Hebrew. They had published this originally upside down. They threw it in a box at the bottom of the Smithsonian, put it in the basement. Many years later, a scholar took it out of the box, looked at it, and went, oh my gosh, it's upside down. It's Phoenician, ancient Hebrew. So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history? I'll show you in a few minutes, and we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to show you some more things that the Smithsonian, science, government, commerce colluded to erase. By the way, I want to thank the directors of the documentary Lost Civilizations of North America for bringing these stories to my attention. I was blown away. To find more, visit the website lostcivilizationdvd.com. Here's the thing we should be asking ourselves. I don't know the story of these. Do you know that? Did you know that? Do you live in Ohio and did you know that? Why not? Were the American Indians wronged? Yes. Yes. And that's what we focus on in America, is we were bad to the American Indians. Forget about it. It's in the past. The question should be the ones that the founders asked. Who are they? What knowledge do they have? Can you imagine the difference we would have now if we would put our differences aside and put our past in the past and concentrate on today and say, let's learn from each other. What do you have? What is that? What is that? When we come back, I'm going to be joined by Peter Lilback, who is, I've told you before, is one of my favorite authors. He's going to talk to me a little bit about the founders here. And I'm also going to show you some documents that show how that history has been erased. Next. This is the Smithsonian Annual Report, 1882, 1883. This is John Wesley Howell. This is an original copy. John Wesley Howell in 1789. Again, this is Powell. This is the director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institute. He said this. Artifacts found prior to Christopher Columbus's arrival would be considered illegitimate by the Smithsonian. Only the savage Indian culture would be observed, and this created the artificial barrier to science. Only the savage. Science was colluding with government because of commerce, and religion was involved. Now, why do I tell you all this stuff? Not because I'm an Indian expert or anything else. You got to do your own homework. I just found out about this stuff. I'm amazed by it. I don't know what the answer is on this. The reason why I bring it up is the stock is not bad. The soup went bad, but the stock is not. Peter Lilback, Dr. Peter Lilback. How are you, sir?
Good to see you.
This is a book that needs to be owned by every American. Every single American should have this book in their home. It's called Sacred Fire. These are the words of George Washington, and it takes history absolutely apart. Not on somebody's opinion, but on their own words, on his words. Peter, I want to go to you and talk to you a little bit about, again, the stock. George Washington had a good relationship. Our founders had a good relationship with the Native Americans, right?
There's no question about that. When they came to America, they realized they could not survive without a close relationship with the Indian people. The greatest story, for example, is the Pilgrims who were blown off course. 800 miles out of their destination in Virginia, they're in Massachusetts. They land on ground, and they're in the middle of nowhere, no government. They make the Mayflower Compact, so they have government when they land. And there's no Native Americans there because a plague had gone through, but one person shows up. He happens to be a Native American that knew English. He'd actually been taken captive to England. He'd learned English. He'd gotten his freedom. He came back, his people were gone. The white settlers are there all of a sudden, and he meets them and he says, welcome. He speaks English. They couldn't believe it. The providence of that moment is extraordinary. They needed help, and there was a person there to help them, and he was a Native American.
Right.
And that creates Massachusetts.
All right, do I have time for one more story real quick? No? Okay, hang on, because I want to come back and talk about, William Penn. Because William Penn said something when he was working with the Indians that is critical to understand the truth, I think, about America. And we'll do that next. The history that has been erased in our nation, and in particular with the Native Americans, happened because it didn't fit the story they created, Manifest Destiny. It only works when Indians were savages, and they had to have savages for commerce and government to expand. The ancient artifacts prove otherwise. Why aren't we looking into those? Peter Lilback is the president of Providence Forum and the author of George Washington's Sacred Fire. Okay, Peter. I think a great place for Americans to understand the truth about Americans and Native Americans and African Americans, all of it. It comes from William Penn. Tell the story.
Great story. Philadelphia, the great founding city of the United States. That's where government began. It was founded by William Penn. He wanted a city without walls. And he determined that he would do it by making a constant commitment to justice and ethics with the Native Americans. There never was an Indian war with William Penn. And there's a wonderful treaty that still exists that describes the commitment they made. And it says this: there are good people and bad people among all people. There are good and bad Indians. There are good and bad Christians. That's what he called them in Philadelphia. And he said, we must come together so that we will address these problems that will come with respect and by communication, affirming the good.
That's where we need to be. There are good among us and bad among us. There are good Americans, bad Americans. There's good parts of America. There are bad parts of America in the American story. We've got to come together as the good people, stand together and guard against the bad so we can live in a country without walls. Peter, thank you very much. Back in a minute.
Morning to you, man. Morning to your love. I say, Africa must wake up, you sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, now. Well, Africa must wake up, you sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today?
The black oasis, ancient Africa, the sacred, awaken the sleeping giant. Science, art is your creation. I dreamt that we could visit old Kemet. Your history is too complex and rigid for some Western critics. They want the whole subject diminished, but Africa's the origin of all the world's religions. We praise bridges that carried us over the battlefronts of Sudanic soldiers, the task put before us.
You hear me out? Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, now. Well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob, for what tomorrow may bring. May a better day come. Yesterday we were kings. Can you tell me, young ones, who are we today?
Who are we today? The slums, diseases, AIDS. We need that all to fade. We cannot be afraid. So who are we today? We are the morning after, the makeshift youth, the slave ship captured. Our diaspora is the final chapter. The ancestral lineage built pyramids of America's first immigrant, the king's son and daughters from now waters. The first architect, the first philosophers, astronomers, the first prophets and the doctors was us.
Hey, now can we all pray, each in his own way, teaching and learning? We can work it out. We'll have a warm bed, we'll have some warm bread and shelter from the storm dread, and we can work it out. Mother Nature feeds all in famine and drought. Tell those selfish in ways not to share us out. What's a tree without root? Lion without tooth, the lie without truth. You hear me out? Africa must wake up, you sleeping sons of Jacob. For what tomorrow may bring, may a better day come. Yesterday we working, can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, Lord. Well, Africa must wake up, you sleeping sons of Jacob. For what tomorrow may bring, may some more love come. Yesterday we working, I tell you, young blood, this world is yours today.
Y'all, everybody out there, this is Nas, Damian Marley, distant relatives. We're all distant relatives, no matter where you from, where you live, how near, how far. Africa, China, Japan, Afghanistan, Israel. We're all fam, we're all distant relatives. So that's why we came together. One of the reasons myself and Damien came together, cause we all come from one place, and that's Africa. That's right, you too, and you, the whole world. We all family, we just spread out all over the place. So to all my distant relatives, let's take it back home.
I say, well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob. For what tomorrow may bring, may a better day come. Yesterday we working, can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Yeah, now. Well, Africa must wake up, the sleeping sons of Jacob. For what tomorrow may bring, may a better day come. Yesterday we working, can you tell me, young ones, who are we today? Who are we today? Morning to you, morning to you, man. Morning to you, love.
ask you a few things before I conform to the popular belief about where I was born. Are they still illin', still killing, popping the corn? How's the horn? How's the love waving the ocean morn? How about the young? Do they still possess the poetry tongue? And do they still greet and say like the depth of the lung? How's the nomad? Did the herd graze well this year? From the news to what I know, the growing gap ain't clear. How's the earth? How are the stars under we converse? Do you still await on change like a new moon's verse? Does it still flood? Ancient wisdom parallel with blood? Do you still see the painted vision? Only script deep, or did you fight off the colonized mind? What if the rainy season, do the kids still bury and get taken with uncertainty like me, scared of leaving? How are the poets, the women, and the orphans torn? I miss them all like old opportunities gone. What of the elders, storytellers, and abandoned homes? Miss them all like childhood, reminisceful songs. Disputes, do they still settle them by bloody issues? This rules, rather finger equipped with sick tools. What of the wind? I recall it with serenity then, when the breeze would come and the trees would bend, and the people would say, look what it leaves within. And the air was violent and our care was silent, and the only law we bore was a pair of tyrants. Man, you know, this is why I'm down and deep indigo, and I sleep really poor under circumstances. Anyway, how stressed does it still rule your chest? Do the camp still rape baby girls without breasts? How are moms, are they still screaming, put away your arms, and against the dispossession of their family on farms? How are the main rivers and the lakes and the seas? Are they still angry with us for our poisonous deeds? And the lakes and the seas for our poisonous deeds. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn. Did the rates multiply? Did the poor fight the drought with their minimum supply? Did the warlord deport the wars and force support of the peace deport to promote the needs and ease and increase divorce? What of police and courts? Are we still heathen force, leaking pores and treated lead to the bleeding corpse? What of the kind and good? Can they still laugh intensely like the minded word? Or is it innocence lost but where the iron stood? What of the playwright's reflection on escape to great sides? Revolution from powers, the writings of brave fights. Despite the luxury that you had, we live by our head with refugees and niggas ain't shit right. And don't you play soccer by the ocean front? In America, I shovel the snow while I'm smoking blunts. You mean to tell me that you out there still toting guns, blowing sons of the hard and hardly coping monks? Damn you, in circumstance too, I can't stand you. You make a mockery of our struggle like Hollywood plans to. And I swear to God, I wish you hell burning back too. And I curse the Europeans who instigated your worst. And I curse the Russians who impregnated the Kalashnikov birth. And it hurts cause you never wait and see the destiny. It's like the conflict of self-submerged and satanic hates. Remember eating fruits, walking back in the hot sun from school, bare feet. The hot sand massaging our feet is deep. Cause now my mother slips on the ice and her back is weak. And I feel like a failure, a mute in the age of speech. Look at me, yo, look at me, look me dead in the eyes. And don't flinch cause you're an accomplice to the great white lies. I can't even begin to express how I break down and stress. I gotta live to tell it, give me a bulletproof vest side. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. This is my blues for the horn, for the horn. And our lives are lost in a causeless struggle. And the truth is lost somewhere in the middle. And the blood is shed by the young. And the elders watch in amazement. And this is my blues. And I sing this for the horn. And the horn is in Africa. And the sadness lies within. And we share solitude. And the poor know
refugee in the time of trouble. Consider our troubles and our suffering against those.
We say as always, peace and blessing, shalom. To the brothers and the sisters, today we will be dealing with some basic fundamentals pertaining to, the so-called Native American Indian brothers and sisters. This is not about hatred. This is not about racism, which is just another term used to disguise the practice of Satanism. This is not about black or white. It's about what is true and correct. This information will not redeem you. It will not save you. I must say, just to understand that we are people of color, which they consider black, is not the application of the true supreme being, understanding, most high power, who some call the Great Spirit, or rather the term God. This is not the correct understanding that will cause the Almighty Father, supreme being, to extend his salvation of mercy to you and me. This is based upon truth versus all the lies. Our situation and circumstances is much more deeper than just understanding, or rather saying that I'm a black man, I'm a black woman, I am the original race. That is not going to cut it when it comes to what the Almighty Father, Supreme Creator, requires that you and I must do. So-called Native American Indian brothers and sisters. Because today you are the star of the show. You have some Israelites, brothers and sisters, that are saying that the so-called Native American Indians are not related to us. For the simple fact, they do not understand the history. Also for the simple fact, which we do understand, because all the falsehood images that they have recorded in their history books of deception, like the one we're looking at here today. Just like the name Indian, Native American Indian. There's no such people as Native American Indian. You will not find any ancient ethnic biblical nation identified by the name Native American Indian in ancient biblical BC time. Neither will you find any nation in ancient biblical times identified, as Negroes. Neither will you find also in ancient biblical time not one nation of people, identifying themselves as African. Which the term Africa, is just derived from this Roman general by the name of Leo Scipios Africanus, who conquered Hannibal's military. And Scipios Africanus, his name was placed on the continent of Ham, with the term Africa. Now concerning the Sioux battle, with General Crook, it was known as the Sioux Battle of the Rosebud. In the history books, they show the so-called Native American Indians as Caucasian, so-called white people, which there is no such people in ancient time known also as white people or Caucasian. You will not find one nation in ancient times identifying themselves as Caucasian or white people. Now here's a picture of the man who went by the name of General George Crook, who fought in the battle against the so-called Sioux Native American Indians, which was known as the Battle of Rosebud. But before the Atlantic slave trade, before 1502, before so-called Queen Isabella, Ferdinand, Hernan Cortez, and Christopher Columbus ever came out of their mother's womb, before our past original so-called Native American Indian sisters were raped, before the invasion, before Custer Douglas came, many, many years ago, this is how the original so-called Cherokees used to look. This is a picture of one of our past ancestors by the name of Bill Pickett, on the left, and on the right, here's a clear original image of our past so-called Cherokee brother, and not those falsehood, actors that falsely, portrayed the false image of what they call Native American Indians in those 1970 TV shows pertaining to John Wayne. And pertaining to the photo that we just showed you, you can find that photo in a book called The Indian, Black, and Hidden Heritage on page 20. Pertaining to our past original so-called Cherokee ancestors, which we are related to them. So this is what we're dealing with historically. As Psalm chapter 52 verse 4 explains, thou loveth all devouring words, lies, O thou deceitful tongue. All the way down to the falsehood images, like the one we're looking at right now on page 6, which is supposed to be a representation of what they call the Kiowa preachers of the Baptist Church, which this is more of a European stock. But here we have on the opposite side of the coin a original image of what they call a Kiowa sister. Yes, this is our sister, who went by the name of Diana Fletcher. This is before, and this is what you have after many years of our sisters being raped, and falsely labeled as Indians, which there's no such people that ever existed in the history of ancient biblical times. I have to say, before we proceed any further, Jacob, in English, Jacob had 12 sons, which our so-called Native American Indian brothers and sisters, are descended from ancient Jacob's bloodline, which they will not understand that right now. It's going to take the immortality of Almighty Father to open up their understanding, because they're suffering from a mental curse, all of us, because of historical sins against the Great Spirit. This has nothing to do with religion. All that has been done is the enemy gave us a false interpretation and false understanding and twisted the information upside down to deceive us and mislead us, which is a biblical curse that the Great Spirit, executed upon our nation. Whether we call ourselves Native American Indian or so-called Negro. As Isaiah chapter 65 verse 15 explains, ye shall leave your name, your biblical name, for a curse. Native American Indian is a cursed name. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 26 further explains the situation of this matter as well. I said I would scatter them into the corners, and we're scattered north, south, east, and west. Some of us are living in the slums and the shanty towns. Some of us are scattered on the reservations, as it still remains today in this 21st century. And this was predicted in biblical times. I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. And no longer do our so-called Native American Indian brothers and sisters remember who they really were in ancient biblical time, accordingly to the original ethnic true identity that the Supreme Creator, Great Spirit, gave them before they was labeled with this falsehood title called Native American Indian, Kiowa, Blackfoot, Cherokee, Shinnecock, Seminolean, or rather so-called Wampanoag. The Most High also caused that understanding of truth to cease out of the minds of the other nations as well, as Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 26 proclaims. How the Father said, the Great Spirit said, he would scatter them, us, into the corners, and I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men, from among the other nations as well. Let's go to a clipping pertaining to one of our so-called Wampanoag brother by the name of Darrell, who is so-called African American descendant and so-called Wampanoag, Native American Indian descendant, which are basically two falsehood identities, which represents the curse, which the Creator, Supreme Being, Great Spirit, put this curse on our mind because of historical, okay, evil disobedience against his laws. Deuteronomy 28 verse 46. And there shall be upon thee for a sign inside our minds, inside our thoughts, and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever, which means for a temporary dispensation of time until the judgment sentence is up. Yes, indeed. So let's give our brother Darrell, okay, a moment of time to hear what he has to say. Yes, a brother who is a descendant of our nation, okay, falsely labeled as Indian in Wampanoag.
My name is Darrell Wixon, and I am half black and Wampanoag. My dad was known to many people as a Saksham, which in our language, if you translate that into English, would be a chief. And he worked a lot for the benefit of the people. And he believed strongly in that way of thinking. And because he had that strength in that direction, he instilled that into us as his children.
Now, in the history books, they give you the false images of what they call the Wampanoag. But notice, okay, on his upper arm, you see what is known as the Shield of David, which was a symbol that the Aztecs and the so-called original Mexicans, they carried, which is also a symbol that the ancient Hebrews used to carry. Which also you'll see this symbol, which they call the Shield of David, found among the past Moorish ancestors, like this picture that we're showing you here today. Okay? On his garment, you see what is known today as the Shield of David, which is a symbol that have also been used, okay, in satanic ritualistic practices. But inside these distorted, okay, history books, it explains the Roman satires, meaning the falsehood understanding, the falsehood image, their version of the first meeting between the pilgrims, so-called pilgrims, Governor John Carver, and the Wampanoag chief, which this is a pictorial image of the distorted truth. This is supposed to be Governor John Carver having a meeting with the Wampanoag chief, because they had chiefs among them, just like the ancient Hebrews, with the Shield of David, okay, on his arm, which is a clue image, symbol, which will lead you back to the Hebrew bloodline pertaining to who the so-called Wampanoag Indians really are, accordingly to truth. Let's go to another one of our brothers by the name of Charles Crossley, who claims the title African American, Mohawk, and Blackfoot, which our beloved brother Charles Crossley, who is a descendant of our nation, okay, explains how if you're not depicted in the image that they have selected in Hollywood pertaining to these images, okay, in these John Wayne movies, or what they falsely call what an Indian is, you're not recognized or respected. Like this image that we're looking at here today, which is supposed to be Geronimo, who is supposed to be from the Apache tribe, an Apache leader. No way when it comes to dealing with truth, this is not how, okay, the original so-called Apache looked. This is a more original image of the so-called Apache brothers before the invasion. Okay, in their ceremony, celebrating when a little girl becomes a young woman, when she reaches her puberty stage. And this is a distorted image of the so-called Apaches, which the history books records this individual named to be Geronimo. What we have here is an offspring of the European stock. Just like this other visual clipping that we're looking at right now, and pretty much, okay, of the European stock, they are basically maintaining the Hebrew heritage customs, okay, pertaining to their dress code, which goes back to the book of Numbers, chapter 15, verse 38 to verse 41, which speaks about the fringes, other known as the tassels, okay, that the ancient Hebrews, okay, decked out on their past garments. Now, just like our brother Charles Crossley stated, the reason why people cannot accept the fact that the so-called Native American Indians are brothers and sisters of color, and that we're related to them, and that they are not no Indians, and what they call Indians, okay, are really Hebrews, because we all been brainwashed too long. And by the way, this is a picture of the original so-called Indians in California. You see? And we are brothers. They just have been brainwashed out of their true ancient identity. The same way some of the so-called Hebrew Israelite brothers that don't know the true history. And we understand when they see all these false images, well, that's not an Indian. That's not a so-called Native American Indian. That is a Hebrew brother whose ancient identity have been stripped out of his mind. And the sisters too as well. Just like the title African American. Just like the title African. Just like the title Caucasian. These are all brainwashing false titles. Just like what they call the Bat Creek Stone, which they found in 1889, okay, at a burial, Easton, Tennessee, which is where, okay, several of our past ancestors once dwelt, who was falsely labeled as, okay, Indians. And they carved several Hebrew letters on this stone, which they found, okay, at a burial, eastern of Tennessee. And for us that know the basic fundamentals of Hebrew, this is the letter Yah. That's the letter Yah. That is a Ra. So the question that I pose here, what is the past generation of our past ancestors who were falsely called Native American Indians, what are they doing carving Hebrew letters on a stone, which they found in the geographical location of Easton, Tennessee for the year of 1889? 1 + 1 = 2. I'll let you figure it out. There's a man by the name of James Adair. I think he was a fur trader. He dwelt among what they call the Native American Indians for around 30 years, and he recorded, okay, their customs just like a journalist, and he recorded his experiences that he physically experienced with our past ancestors. And this is what he had to say. On page 180, he stated that the Indians, so-called Indians, he said, the manner of curing their sick, just like it states in the book of James, chapter 5, verse 15, how we're supposed to acquire to the Almighty Father when there's a sick brother or sister among us, or child. So James Adair, okay, during his experience, okay, of dwelling for a period of time among our brothers and sisters, he speaks about the so-called Native American Indians. Their manner of curing their sick brothers and sisters is very similar, okay, to that of the Hebrews, not Jews. There's no J in the ancient Hebrews. He states how they always invoke Yahweh. What is the so-called Native American Indians doing, evoking the Most High Creator, Yahweh? Of course, we know there's no E in the ancient Hebrew because they add the E as well as the J. And if you check out their old past ceremonial chants, when they perform what is known as the rain dance, which was basically them showing their respect to the Almighty Father Creator, who they call God, for sending the rain down on the earth to bless their crops to grow. You'll find the Hebrew alphabet. Yes, indeed. Yah, 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 Yah. And you'll also find them chanting the alphabet Ha, Ha, Yah, Ha, Ha, Ha. And you'll also find them chanting the Hebrew alphabet Wah, Wah, Yah, Ha, Wah. Just like this sister here. Okay, from this photograph we're looking at right now. And I met this sister about 5, 6, 7 years ago while attending what they call a Shinnecock powwow upstate in the Hamptons. Now, I was able to explain to one of our so-called Shinnecock sisters, okay, why the brothers and sisters fell and why the Great Spirit allowed them as well as us to be brought down into captivity. Which the explanation of this situation can all be explained in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 20. Because of the wickedness of our historical wickedness of thy doings of our forefathers as it still remains today, whereby thou, you and me, and our past ancestors, whereby thou hast forsaken me. The me represent the Great Spirit, the Most High, Ancient of Days, Yahweh, who they falsely call God today. Forsaken what? Forsaken his laws, statutes, and commandments. Like Leviticus chapter 25, verse 5. History records for 1512, Pope Julius II. Not as though we need Pope Julius II words to confirm truth versus lies, but just for the record of understanding's sake. History records brown-skinned, befeathered people, talking about our so-called Native American Indian brothers and sisters, past ancestors. In 1512, Pope Julius II, he proclaimed that the so-called Indians were children of Adam and Eve. Now, of course, Adam and Eve never existed because of these reasons. Psalm chapter 52, verse 2. The tongue deviseth mischief like a sharp razor, working deceitfully. The fourth verse. Thou lovest all devouring words of lies and deception. O thou deceitful tongue on earth. Ecclesiastes chapter 37, verse 3. O wicked imagination, whence cometh thou? Into cover the earth with deceit. Let's go to this next clipping from this movie titled The Uncle Tom's Cabinet to give us some more visual, images pertaining to our so-called Native American Indian ancestors who we are related to as well.
What are they doing here? They're Indians.
Ah, this is one of my many unsuccessful experiments. You see, with Indians, there's absolutely nothing to be done. There's the same difference between a Negro and an Indian as there is between a dog and a coyote. You can put a dog on a leash, beat him, and he'll always be there to lick your feet. Take away a coyote's liberty and you've cut off his hair. An Indian will never be a slave. No one has ever been able to make them reproduce in captivity.
So there you have it, brothers and sisters. More images of our so-called Native American Indian ancestors, But going back to this book called Black Native American Indian Heritage, on page 39, they give you a watered-down picture, of the so-called Native American Indian brothers and the so-called Negro Afro-American brother dwelling in the same village in harmony and peace. Now, in their history text, they will falsely claim that the so-called Native American Indians, one day he met a so-called African-American brother and they became friends. That is a lie. If we was able to resurrect a so-called Native American Indian brother from the 1300s and the 1200s, they would tell you that they know that they are related to the so-called Negro Afro-American brothers and sisters. You see, just like it states in Hebrews the 13th chapter around the first verse, let brotherly love continue. In 1685, when Africans, so-called African Americans, and native, so-called Native American Indians, slaves, escaped together, they formed a Maroon Society. For 8 generations, the Dutch armed forces tried to crush their community. You see, we don't understand this portion of history. The so-called Maroons and the so-called African Americans, past ancestors, They band together. Coming from this hidden heritage of the Indians book on page 29, it records the first so-called Africans, there's no such people, brought to the new world known as America by the Europeans, slavers. They probably arrived in April 1502 aboard the ship that brought the new governor of Hispaniola, Nicholas de Ovando. Let's continue. Soon after they landed, the so-called African-American past ancestors and the slave master, some Africans, so-called African-Americans, they escaped, to the woods and found a new home among the Native Americans. Yes, the villages of our past ancestors, the so-called Native American Indian brothers and sisters that took the so-called African American brothers and sisters into their village when they was running for their life to escape the slave master after they was deported from what is known today as the west coast of Africa, which they sojourned for a dispensation of time, as page 39 depicts. The so-called Afro-American past ancestors of ours fled down into the villages of the Seminolean brothers and sisters in Florida. And they band together like a rubber band, and they stuck together. And they loved each other, and they cared about each other, and they supported each other, and they fought against the enemy for the welfare of the brothers and sisters of our nation. Not Negro or Native American Indian, a nation of people who have been brainwashed. Here's a picture of one of our past, so-called Cheyenne Indian ancestors. Her name was Eliza Stewart. She was sent into prison in the 1800s for shooting at someone. You can find her image in this book called The Black Pioneers by John W. Ravage. Forget about the John Wayne cowboys and Indian fake images. In the year of 1837, Osceola, a so-called Native American Indian brother, he had become the leader of the black and the red resistance. There ain't no such thing as no red Indians. That's a byword in proverb. As Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 37, predicted that we would be labeled with these false identities like red man, black man, Afro-American man, Cherokee man, Indian man. So Osceola, he was one of the main leaders, resistance of the U.S. slaveholders. Now check out what we're about to read here today is being repeated all over once again in our history of time. While the Seminolean nation, so-called Seminolean nation, as a whole, they were showing signs of division, just like we're repeating these same old divisions here today through hatred, strife, and conflict. Those who rode with Osceola, such as Wildcat, were prepared to defend their black brothers and sisters to the death, which all has been erased out of our minds and replaced with a whole bunch of foolishness. And most of us really don't care anymore. This is a so-called Negro Indian chief by the name of Mikan-Ofa. The Seminoleans, when they went down to the territory of Mississippi, they found themselves at the mercy of what they call the Five Nations, such as the Creek Nations, such as the Chickasaw and the Choctaw, and some of the so-called Creek Nations. They were being used as instruments of the slave masters to target, to track down, to hunt, and to kill the so-called Seminolean brothers and sisters and the so-called African American past ancestors, brothers and sisters. But this was not all so-called Native American Indian brothers and sisters doing this. They don't explain this situation correctly. The same way you had some wicked, evil, so-called African American, Uncle Tom satanic Negroes that was enemies against the brothers and sisters as well. And some of these so-called Choctaw, Chickasaws, these so-called Creek, just like the Uncle Tom so-called Negro that used to live in the White House, the big house, they took a bribe from the slave master. Exactly just like the part that Samuel Jackson played, okay, in this movie called Django. The wicked, evil, supreme Uncle Tom house nigger that used to live in the big house that did not give a damn about the suffering of his brothers or sisters. But it was written that this would happen to the so-called Native American Indians, as well as the so-called Negro. Genesis 49 verse 19 speaks about how a troop, like the cavalry troop, like the military in Florida that fought against the Seminolean brothers and sisters and the so-called Negro in the 1800s, like the war with Custer Douglas. For the reason that 1 Ezra chapter 8 verse 86 speaks about, how all this has befallen us is done unto us for our wicked works and our great sins. Historically, 2 Ezra chapter 1:25, seeing ye have forsaken me, the Most High Creator, I will forsaken you as well. Which Deuteronomy chapter 33 verse 20 gives us a description of the so-called Native American Indians. How they used to wear the crown, the chiefs, and they would take one of the feathers to cut the flesh of their brother to represent their covenant of brotherhood. Just like 1 Chronicles chapter 12 verse 8 gives us another description of our past ancestors who were falsely labeled as Native American Indians, which a lot of them were tall, a lot of them were warriors before they fell, the woman and the men. In the states and of the Gadites, they separated themselves unto David into the hole to the wilderness, just like they ran into the wilderness for refuge. So it says, and of the Gadites, they separated themselves unto David into the hole to the wilderness, men of might and men of war. Yes, indeed, the so-called Maroons, the Seminoleans, those brothers was warriors. And they was warriors of true brotherhood. Yes, they had their fault, just like every other man and woman have their fault. So they were men of war. They were fit for the battle, that could handle shield and buckler, whose faces were like the faces of lions. Like they used to put the war paint on their face, okay, to make themselves look like lions. When they used to go into their guerrilla warfare in the woods for survival. And it also says they were as swift as the roe upon the mountain. It says that they were swift, they were fast on their feet, like a roe, which is a deer in the mountains, which history records, okay, artist George Catlin, who used to draw images of the so-called Native American Indian brothers in their royal regalia, with the crown, the moccasins, and the pants. The artist, George Catlin, from his observation of research, he also concludes that the so-called Native American Indians' customs are in sequential harmony with the ancient Hebrew customs. The artist George Catlin, he wrote on a exceptional concerning the so-called Kiowa, okay, Native American Indians. He said that they were near 7 feet in stature. They were very tall because men in ancient times were much more taller than the men here today in modern times. And you got many giant bones found in India and different parts of South America to confirm these facts. George Catlin stated how the so-called Kiowa Native American Indian brothers and sisters, they used to stand up 7 feet in stature tall, who purportedly how they could run down and slay a buffalo on their feet. They used to could run a buffalo down on their feet and catch him and kill him for necessity, not excess. In the original Kiowa, so-called Apache, Cherokee, Cheyenne, Shinnecock, Hopi, the Pueblos, they were not of European stock. They looked just like you and me. We're talking about the original brothers and sisters that came over here from the Middle East to what is known today as North America. Way before Custer Douglas, Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand, Isabella was even born out of their mother's womb. You see, they had woolly hair and brown skin just like you and me here today. Like I said before, this is not about racism or black and white. It's about the truth. Because their image and their character, has been marginalized and assassinated and oppressed. For the history of so-called Black History Month, you see many of the so-called Native American Indians, men and women, throughout the course of history, throughout different generations, they begin to forsake the Great Spirit, the Creator, who they call God. They begin to worship the sun. They used to run these hooks through their chest and blow fire out the mouth to worship Satan. Just like this image that I'm giving you here today. And they have these images recorded in the museum. They begin to paint their bodies. They begin to put these demonic satanic dinner plates in their lips, which is very painful, which represents them worshiping Satan. This was the beginning of their downfall. Then it went from one level of evil to another level of evil. They began to go into tribal conflict. They began to kill each other. They began to declare war on their own brothers and sisters, until the Almighty Father allowed them to be taken down. Anytime you're constantly fighting and killing and doing things like this, putting these satanic plates inside your lips, all kind of evil, it's just a matter of time before that nation fall, which has happened to our nation. Forget about Native American Indians and so-called Negro, and so-called Puerto Rican, and so-called Haitian, and so-called Brazilian, and so-called Mexican, and so-called Afro-Caribbean, and so-called Afro-Peruvian. We all come from the same nation, and we're speaking these different dialects because of our historical disobedience against the one that they call God here today, which is only for a dispensation of time. The so-called Native American Indians are related to us, even though some of them in this generation of time think they are not, because they've been brainwashed in their oppression as well, and also because of pride. But the Almighty Father is going to clear up all this confusion one day and put the whole world back into proper perspective. Here's the image of one of our past Seminolean past ancestors who once dwelled in Pensacola, Florida. Here's another image of one of our past ancestors from 1835 who went by the name of Abraham. Yes, a so-called Negro, as would be known today. Brother Abraham, he rose up in power among the so-called Seminolean brothers and sisters. He became the prime minister. He became the counselor. He became a principal chief among the so-called Seminolean brothers and sisters. You see, he became an advisor. And the so-called Seminolean brothers and sisters would not make a move without Brother Abraham's consent. Also, when you read into the antiquities of the so-called Cherokees, it makes mention, how the so-called Cherokees make mention, stating that Abraham is one of their ancestors that taught them to pray with their hands raised up to the sky towards the east. So we're going to conclude on this token, and this shall be the end of the so-called Black History Month pertaining to the so-called Native American Indians, brothers and sisters. Baruch chapter 1 verse 13. Pray for us also unto the great spirit which they call Lord and God, the Most High. For we have sinned against the Most High, the great spirit, who they call Lord and God here today. Our God, the great spirit, the Almighty Father of immortality. And unto this day, the fury of the Almighty Father, great spirit, and his wrath is not turned from us.
A lot of the Indians would go out and pick up potatoes during the harvest of the potato season, because there was huge potato farms. And some of them would refer to the Narragansetts as the potato niggers. If you were not white, you were black.
We were sitting on a plane one day, my wife and I talking Cherokee, and a lot of the African Americans didn't know what we were. A lot of the Hispanics didn't know if we were Jamaican or Cuban or Latino, and the white passengers of the plane certainly didn't have a clue, because that's the first time they ever heard Cherokee spoken. So we thought that's unique. You know, it takes a Cherokee to understand Cherokee. So I thought that was real amusing. We sitting on the plane talking, everybody staring at us. I don't think they were staring at us because I was black and Indian. They were staring at us because they didn't know what we were saying, conversing.
I guess the way it works is people are so used to seeing what is depicted as an Indian within the movies, the old movies and things. So if you don't look that way, they don't expect you to be Indian. They think you're either black or Hispanic or something else. But most people don't perceive you as an Indian if you don't look like that poster type Indian that they have on TV.
Oppression of the poor man, please rise up, Abba Shiloh. Be our refugee in the time of trouble. Consider our troubles and our suffering against those that hate us with cruelty. Let their mischief return into the very own bosom.
You see, with Indians, there's absolutely nothing to be done.
Be not far from us, for trouble is near, yeah. And no other, yes, can what deliver us. And no man can keep his own soul alive. In the valley of the shadows of death, arise, great prince, yes, of the host, and let the wickedness come to an end, yeah. And let the portion of his cup be filled up with fire, and let the angels go before our presence. Forsaken not me, yes, I'm the brokenhearted, for we are, yes, your creation, and you have commanded us to wait patiently. But in faith we ask you to fight our battle, as in the ancient times, Exodus 14:14. Great glory and honor to the great prince. Mercy, gratitude, redemption, we pray every day. We say, Shiloh, great prince, please help us. 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 Redemption. Help us. Redemption. Help us. Redemption. Help us. Redemption. 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 To the 12 tribes. Redemption. 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 To the 12 tribes. Redemption. Shiloh. Abba. The Nazarene. Abba. Nazarene. Shiloh. Redemption. To the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes. The 12 tribes. Redemption. To the 12 tribes. Shiloh. Shiloh. The Nazarene. Shiloh. The Nazarene. Shiloh. The Nazarene.
is people are so used to seeing what is depicted as an Indian within the movies, the old movies and things. So if you don't look that way, they don't expect you to be Indian. They think you're either black or Hispanic or something else. But most people don't perceive you as an Indian if you don't look like that poster type Indian that they have on TV.